Okay, so you will want to make sure that you get out your resume notes that we started the other day. It's important to have those and take notes because you will use these notes to help you when you are writing your resume. So this is where we left off, summary of skills. I kind of already went through it, but I just want to quickly recap. So the summary of skills section, you might not necessarily have to have it on your resume. This is really your section that you are going to include any skills or talents or anything else that you couldn't fit into like your education or your work experience or activities. So this is like if you have something important that's going to apply to the job that you are applying for, but it didn't fit into another section, this is where you're going to put it. Okay, next part is our references. So what we're going to do with our references, it used to be that when we applied for a job and we sent in our resume, we also sent in our references, and that changed. Then it changed to kind of putting down at the bottom this information here where we would say references available upon request. And I would say actually now you don't even really need to do that. It's a given. An employer knows that they should be able to ask for your references. And so when you're applying for your job, you should know that you need to have references available for them when they ask for them. Now, when an employer gets to the point that they're asking for a reference, that's a good sign. That means that you've kind of passed through that cover letter and that resume, and they want to look a little deeper, and they are thinking about interviewing you. And before they interview you, they want to check in with your references. So first of all, we need to know who a reference should be. A reference should be somebody that's really going to say something nice about us, that's going to talk about our skills and our abilities to help us get that job. We don't want to do family members if we can. The reason for that is because our family members, for the most part, they're going to like us. So they're probably going to say something nice about us. So if I'm an employer and I'm looking to hire you, I probably don't want to talk to your mom or dad because I'm going to assume that they're going to tell me nice things about you anyway. I want to talk to people that have observed your work habits, that know your character, that know your skills. The only exception that I would say to having a family member as a reference is if you have a family member that is your boss, meaning maybe they own a business or they're manager for a business and you work for them and they are your boss. Then I would say it's completely appropriate to then list them as a reference. When we're looking at references, we want to have 2 to 3 people. I say it's always best to at least have those 3 people. It's important that you get their permission first. So you make sure that you ask them, will you be a reference for me? The reason that you want to do this is number one, you want to give them a heads up. You want to let them know that they potentially would have an employer contacting them, asking them questions about you. So giving them a heads up is a really good idea. 2, you're going to need some information from them, some contact information from them. And then 3, you want to make sure too that they're actually going to say something good about you. You might think that this person is going to give you a good review, but they might not have the same idea. So it's important to ask them first that they're going to give you a good recommendation before you actually put them down. So that would be kind of this part here is make sure that you're going to only list people that are going to speak well of you. You want to include their name, their address, their employer, their job title, and then their phone number. So examples of people that you want to look for is past employers or even current employers. Sometimes we might be getting part-time jobs in addition to the job that we have. Teachers, especially for you guys at your age, teachers are going to be great references for you. They're able to see your work ethic in the classroom. They're able to see your other skills. So those would be great references. Same thing with coaches. And I would say too, for your guys' age, advisors of clubs would be another thing. Okay. All right, next part we're going to talk about is how to set up our resume. So our resume really should be divided into sections. And so we kind of talked about the different sections that our resume should include. Some of them we might end up leaving out. Like we talked about, if we don't have work experience, we don't want to list that on our resume because we don't have any to include. So we just need to be mindful of the sections that we are including on our resume. Each section then should have a heading, and that heading we want to make sure is stands out. So we can do bold, we can make the text larger, we could do both of those things. We want it to stand out. And what I always say too, I'm going to continue probably to say this, there's really no right or wrong way to format your resume. It's just as long as we stay consistent. So the way that we format one of our headings, we want to format the next heading the same way. So some major headings that we might have is our objective, our education, our employment and our work experience, and our school activities. So I would say objective and education is a must. You have to have these on your resume. This is where we're going to see now, if you don't have any work experience, you're not going to have that section on your resume. Same thing with school activities. If you are not involved in any school activities, you're not going to include that on your resume. What I would say to you is, now that you are in high school, you might want to think about these things, because when you're starting to apply for those jobs, if you do not have your work experience yet, because you got to have your first job before you get work experience, you're going to need to beef up your resume in other places. So that's going to be your education. And then the other great thing is school activities. So I would say you might want to think about getting involved in some of those school activities, and that will show then on your resume that you have those skills. You just didn't learn them through work experience. These are examples of maybe some other headings that you might include. Things like computer experience, depending on the job that you're applying for, any honors, certifications, awards, volunteer experience is another one. Maybe you're not involved in school activities, but you have a lot of volunteering experience. That would be a section then that you might want to include. How items should be arranged on your resume. There's really two types of resumes that we can have. We can have a chronological format and we can have a functional format. I will tell you that I have not ever actually seen a functional format. Like I haven't experienced one with what I've done. Okay. So I would say, especially for you guys right now, you're going to do a chronological format, but I will explain what a functional format means. So a chronological format is your work history is going to work backward. So you're going to start with your most recent job, and then you're going to work back to your oldest job. Okay. When we are looking with our chronological, and really we should be doing that, we should be listing our employer, the dates of our employment at that job, and then also our job responsibilities. And I talked about our job responsibilities when in that section of work experience. It's important that we're detailed with those responsibilities. We should have at least 2 responsibilities listed. We never want to use the word I in those responsibilities. We want to start with an action verb. We really want to make it short and to the point with those. This really format it says that it's used if you're new to the workforce and have limited experience. I would say that this is just really a common format for us to use. And I would say definitely if you're new to the workforce, so definitely at your age, you're going to be using a chronological format. Now, the functional format, you're not necessarily going to list your employment dates and your company names. You are going to more focus on your skills and your responsibilities that you had throughout your work experience. This format is really used after you've developed your career skills and your accomplishments. So I would say that this is going to be used later in your career, more professional resume. Next is the order of education and experience. And so what I say for this one is it really depends on where you have the most experience, and what type of job you're applying for. So high school and college students should include their education directly after their objective. However, what I would caution for that is if you have work experience that directly relates to the job that you're applying for, then I would list my experience above my education. Okay. Just remember that there's really no right or wrong. So as an employer, I probably am not going to look at this and say, oh, their education is listed first. They probably should have listed their experience. The reason that we want to kind of pay attention to our skills versus our education and our experience is if we're applying for a job, remember that employer is going to quickly look through that resume. And so we want to make sure that they're seeing our skills that are most relevant first. So that's why if I have that job experience that's relevant, I want to list that above my education. Okay. If we have more relatable things in our education, then we want to list our education first. So that's why I would say, think about the job that you're applying for. What skills and responsibilities will you have at that job? What do you need? And then look at your education and your past work experience, and can you match any of those skills? That will then decide if you're going to list your experience or your education first. So format is important. However, just remember that it lies in the consistency. So this is really the most important bullet off of this slide. The format is important because of the consistency of the format is important. Okay. So there's really not a best format for you to use. There's actually tons of different formats that you can use for a resume. The consistency is what matters. So stick to one format. Also, this is going to show your attention to detail, and it's going to show that you have organizational abilities through your resume. Should you use complete sentences when you're describing jobs? I would say no. We really want to use a lot of action phrases instead of complete sentences. This is important. We want to make our resume short. We want to keep to the facts. So leave out unnecessary words. We want to try to match skills and experience with the employer's needs. So pay attention. We really want to just focus on those and leave out any of the other filler things. Remember, our resume should be one page and that's it. So we don't want to go into too much description. The more description is for our cover letter. We can do a little more description in our cover letter. And then really it's for our interview. That's where we're going to really be able to describe our skills. The look of the resume really does matter. We want it to be clean. We want it to be professional looking. We want it to be easy to read. If an employer gets a crumpled up resume and it's hard to read, and it's dirty, they're probably going to throw it away because it looks like you don't care. So we want to make sure that we have a clean looking resume that's easy to read. Some points to that, we want to try to use a professional paper. And so I know that you might not think that there's professional paper, but we want to use like a white or an off-white piece of paper. We want it to have a good quality weight to it. And you'll notice if you've ever looked at different types of paper, some papers are thicker and some papers are lighter. We don't need to necessarily use like a cardstock, which is a really thick paper, but we do want to have a nice weight to it. We don't want it to be too flimsy. We also want to use black ink. It just is easier to read with that white paper and that black ink. I would say we want to try to avoid using color paper. We don't necessarily want to use any fancy graphics. The only exception that I would say to that is if we are applying for a job that we're showing our creativity and maybe even our formatting, in that case, we might be able to be a little more creative in our resume. But other than that, I would say we want to stick to just white paper, black ink. And then this is important too. Make sure that we're printing with a quality printer. We don't want any streaks on our printer. We don't want it to get ripped when it's getting printed. So we want that quality piece of paper being printed from a quality printer. I think I'll stop here and create another video for the last little section of resume tips and suggestions.